Chapter 46 Iron Man Never Backs Down. While eating, Peter said, "The situation seems quite dire. When I went to the lab to see Mr. Stark yesterday, Colonel Rhodes seemed to be trying to persuade him." Peter said, "Although I don't understand these things, I know that it might not be a good thing if Mr. Stark's Jaegers fall into the hands of the military. Colonel Rhodes, as Mr. Stark's friend, is perhaps in a difficult position after all. He also represents the interests of a group of people," Peter said. "You're smarter than I thought. I thought you wouldn't quite understand the current situation." Peter shook his head and said, "Actually, I don't understand it either, but I know that everyone wants those mechs because they are really powerful. No, it's because it's a weapon. If it were just a robot vacuum cleaner, even if it could clean New York in an instant, the military wouldn't be so interested in it." Peter paused for a moment, then said, "I don't think we should hand over the Jaeger, but I know Mr. Stark is under a lot of pressure. What do you think I should do? Or should I go and comfort him or offer him some advice? I can't just do nothing, can I? I think you should take care of your own affairs first. If you can fully control the power of the spider mutation, perhaps these things will be minor issues for you." Just as Peter had predicted, the next day, Schiller's psychiatric clinic welcomed an expected guest. James Rhodes, also known as Colonel Rhodes. He said bluntly to Schiller, "The military needs Stark's Jaeger technology, but his attitude has always been ambiguous. I just wanted to ask you, what exactly are his plans? Has S.H.I.E.L.D. played a role in this?" "Actually, you didn't want to come either," Schiller said. "I could tell." Rod twitched one corner of his mouth and said, "It seems there's a reason why Tony charged you such a high consultation fee. Obviously, your superiors know that you can't ask Stark about this, otherwise S.H.I.E.L.D. would get the answer faster than you. But it's no use asking me anyway. The military needs Stark's Jaeger. It can give us an advantage in many areas and save us a lot of lives. Don't you realize that your reluctance has made your words incredibly dry? Colonel Rhodes, I know you're in a difficult position too. The military is constantly pressuring Stark, but he's also your friend. So you can only make yourself feel better by deceiving yourself. You know perfectly well what these armors will be used for, but as long as you convince yourself that doing so might be beneficial, you can feel a little better from the guilt of pressuring your friends." "Obeying orders is a soldier's duty," Rod said. "Indeed. But what about Stark? What about your friend? You repeatedly went against his wishes, forcing him to betray his own interests, using friendship to blackmail him. You've always known how much Tony values you. Stark doesn't have many friends, but you're definitely one of them, and perhaps the most important one. You know he's willing to pay these prices for you, willing to do the things he hates most. Compromise and bow down. You know, Stark will agree sooner or later. If you're driven to the brink by your boss, he'll definitely come to your rescue." "Stop talking," Rod said. He pressed his lips tightly into a thin line. Schiller pressed the button on his pen, the crisp sound startling Rhodes awake. Schiller said, "Perhaps it's because you possess something he lacks that he's willing to do this. My advice is that perhaps these are the things you should cherish most. Stark's friendship is more valuable than the military's, and not because he's richer, but the qualities that a proud genius sees in you, those qualities that even he doesn't possess, the qualities that would make him willing to pay such a price for you, are more worthy of your persistence and pride than those empty honors, aren't they?" Rhodes remained silent. The next day, when Schiller went to Stark Tower, he ran into Rhodes as he was leaving. Behind him was an adjutant, who looked visibly pleased. They seemed to have gotten what they wanted. But Rod's expression didn't improve at all. He still had a tense face. He didn't look at Schiller and just walked straight past him. After going upstairs, Stark stood in front of his armor and carefully examined his work. "It seems you've made your decision, and they've gotten what they wanted, haven't they?" Schiller asked. "Okay." Stark turned around, tensing his shoulder muscles before suddenly relaxing them, letting his shoulders droop and exhaling. "I know I should have stuck to your advice. It was right, but I didn't do it. I knew it was the right thing to do, that I wouldn't have to pay any price, but I still didn't. I knew it wouldn't work." Schiller sat down at the table with the medical records in his hand and wrote in his notebook. He didn't look up, but just sighed and said, "Many people are willing to pay a huge price to pursue emotional compensation, especially someone like you who has never lacked material things. You'd rather forego the outcome that maximizes your own interests than see Rod caught in the middle and in a difficult position. You paid the price to buy back his temporary friendship with you. Yes, I know what you're trying to say. You're friends, that's what you think, and so does he. But especially since not both sides are so willing, this friendship can't last. If you keep spending money to buy things, there will come a day when you can't afford them anymore. When you can't afford them anymore, maybe Rod will understand you, but the world won't. Finally, Schiller said, when you feed those people's appetites, the price you have to pay for your feelings is endless. Stark said, I've thought about this before. I know that once I give in, I'll inevitably keep losing. They can use Rhodes to persuade me to hand over some of the mech technology, and one day they can force him to persuade me to hand over all the mechs, or to build more war machines for them. From the moment I learned just how many civilians my weapons had harmed, I knew that wisdom could bring not only wealth, but also disaster, Stark said, pressing his finger to his eye socket. I only recently came to understand this. The ultimate fate of a genius is always one where there is nowhere left to retreat. When everyone knows that you have a brain capable of saving the world, they will also simultaneously develop the ambition to let you destroy the world. After a moment of silence, Schiller stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside the Stark Tower, the New York sunset was in full view. Stark followed his gaze, and the dazzling light blurred his vision with a hazy light. Schiller said, What do you do when you have nowhere to retreat? Stark said, This is my home, and it's Pepper's, Jarvis's, and all of Stark's. In the end, no one could force me to hand over this place. If they want more. Stark's eyes, always brimming with a myriad of emotions, met Schiller's gaze directly. His expression was not somber. Rather, he spoke calmly. Iron Man never backs down. Schiller looked at him and asked, So, have you ever thought about overturning this absurd and boring negotiating table? You are like a devil who leads people astray. This is much more effective than praying to God. I never pray. I don't rely on God. And I don't believe in those strange tricks or absurd rumors. As soon as he finished speaking, Stark saw everything in his lab begin to tremble slightly. Then, everything floated up. In an instant, it was as if gravity had been lost. Everything floated in midair. Cups, notebooks, computers, wrenches. The setting sun outside the window shone on these things in places where they shouldn't have been exposed to sunlight. Schiller stood in the center of everything, the light behind him casting a long shadow in front of him. The shadows of all the objects overlapped into a vast net, and Stark stood in the middle of it all. He reached out his hand, and a drop of water from a glass landed on his fingertip. Stark looked up and around. He saw countless ordinary, mundane objects in midair, and the unremarkable ceiling and walls above him. He saw a door to a new world. Chapter 47 Off-Field Technical Guidance. Schiller and Stark stood together in front of a damaged Mark II mech. Stark said, Listen, the problem now is that the braking system here is completely broken, and we need to fix it before we can do any modifications. As he spoke, he picked up a wrench, walked over, and began to tinker with the mecha. Schiller stood behind him and said to the symbiote in his mind, No, you can't eat his brain, but his head looks delicious, really delicious, and smells wonderful. But, Schiller, hands on his hips and one hand over his forehead, reorganized his thoughts and said, You can't just eat people's brains because... Schiller paused for a long time, then thought, well, although this race all looks strange, their tastes are surprisingly consistent. We can eat his brain and we can do it ourselves, the symbiote said. No, all right. Stark was still oblivious. He fiddled with it for a while, then tapped the railing next to him with a wrench, moved to a different spot, and continued tinkering while saying, Magic armor? That sounds really good. I think it's a special kind of atomic force. What do you think is the best application of it? Oscillation or extreme compression? Schiller asked himself, what is the best form of application? Oscillation or extreme compression? It's about decomposition and reconstruction, the symbiote said. It's about decomposition and reconstruction, Schiller said. As he spoke, he placed his hand directly on the joint that hadn't been repaired yet. A large part of the joint flashed, and when it returned to its original position, it looked brand new. Stark stood up, his eyes wide, arms crossed, and said, This so-called magic you're talking about seems far more powerful than your demonstration of weightlessness. I'm amazing. I'm amazing. I'm amazing. The symbiote started squeaking and yelling in Schiller's head again. Schiller said, Good. Good. You're amazing. He had to admit that the symbiote was still a bit more useful than magic. After all, his current magic ability was only at a low level, which was fine for bluffing, But when it came to actual combat, he still had to rely on the symbiote. Shrink the armor, make it very small, the symbiote said in Schiller's mind. Shrink the armor, Schiller said. Of course I've considered this. My Mark V, in later versions, was originally intended to be compressed into a suitcase, but it's not fully developed yet, so it can't be carried around freely for the time being. I think the suitcase plan is a bit conservative. Can it be even smaller? Certainly. How small do you think it can be compressed to? Schiller asked the symbiote in his mind. How small do you think it can be compressed to? A bottle of fear venom. Can it be compressed to the size of a small vial of fear venom? Schiller asked. I want to drink, the symbiote said. Schiller rolled his eyes in exasperation. So this is how you bargain now. After finishing a bottle of wine with relish, the symbiote said, a cigarette can be compressed to the size of a cigarette. After Schiller told Stark, Stark seemed excited as he paced back and forth in the room, saying, this is indeed atomic-level structure and recombination. If that's the case, it might be even smaller than a cigarette, perhaps even at the nanometer level. Can it be smaller than a cigarette? Schiller asked in his mind. Yes, but it will explode when deployed, the symbiote said. Schiller then said to Stark, it could actually be made smaller, but I can't guarantee that the unfolding process will be safe. Stark said, anyway, let's get started and come up with a more revolutionary technology. Then I'll just throw all those old versions of armor to the military and let them handle the junk. It'll save me money on e-waste disposal, and Pepper will be happy. The benefits of being able to arm yourself at any time are just too many. Stark clenched one fist and pounded the palm of his other hand, saying, and I can even put the complete Jarvis into a cell phone. A cell phone with such a powerful intelligent assistant. Can you believe it? Schiller said, God bless Jarvis. After a while, Stark took the somewhat worn-out Mark II down from the shelf. Before he could even see it clearly, a flash of gray mist appeared, and the Mark II disappeared. Then Schiller reappeared, holding a metallic cigarette, and handed it to Stark. Stark asked, is that all? What else do you want? There shouldn't be any spells or incantations. I mean, like any rituals or any staffs. No need, that's too low end, Schiller said. Stark blinked, suddenly filled with boundless and wonderful expectations for magic. But later, this expectation almost drove Strange crazy. He was just a sorcerer. How could Iron Man treat him like an omnipotent god? No matter what he did, Iron Man always acted like, let's leave it to the omnipotent magic. Having heard that the Sorcerer Supreme needed to prepare before casting spells, Stark called Strange a low-level sorcerer, which angered Strange to the point that he almost broke his staff. Regardless of how much Schiller's current performance might drive Strange, who will later be dealing with Iron Man crazy, he's currently giving Stark a pleasant surprise. He says, how do I turn it into a suit of armor? How do I wear it? Schiller wondered in his mind. How is he going to turn it into a mecha? How is he going to wear it? The symbiote hiccuped and said, think about it in your head. Schiller said, think about it in your head. Stark paused for a moment, then hesitated for a moment as he recalled the original armament of the Mark II. Almost instantly, the Mark II was on his body. This transformation was instantaneous, almost an atomic-level reorganization. Stark asked, what's the underlying principle? Schiller asked himself, what is the underlying principle? The symbiotic theory states, thought disturbance. Schiller said to Stark, mind disturbance. Are you referring to brainwaves or something like that? Or bioelectricity? The symbiote in Schiller's mind was a bit tipsy and seemed unable to answer questions anymore. So Schiller said, please don't try to explain magic with science, as long as it works. Stark was itching to start his research immediately, so he turned on Schiller as if he didn't know him at all and said, all right, I know. You wait. With your amazing magic. One day I'll use it better than you. Then he saw the guest out. Schiller was practically kicked out of Stark Tower, but he wasn't angry. Stark was always like that. Once they got hooked on experimentation, they wouldn't care about anything else. He had just returned to the clinic when he saw Steve waiting for him. Steve greeted him and said, Nick sent me to run an errand. He wants to see you, and I think it might be related to Stark. Then Schiller shouted into the air, $10 million an hour? How about it, Director Nick? You're asking for the moon. A voice suddenly came from the phone hanging on Steve's waist. Schiller shrugged and said, well, I was originally going to give you an invoice for $100 million. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then the person said, Also attached is an invoice for $50 million in late payment fees. Deal, Schiller said. Not long after, Schiller arrived at S.H.I.E.L.D.'s International Reception Center again. Nick, wearing an eye patch, shook hands with Schiller, and then the two sat down facing each other. Coulson poured them both a cup of coffee, giving Schiller an espresso. Schiller downed his coffee in one gulp, but Nick picked up his cup and sipped slowly. Schiller spoke first. Shall we get down to business, or get the invoice first? Let's get the invoice first, Nick said. After a while, Nick asked him, I know Stark gave the Jaeger technology to the military, but that's not important. We don't need those Jaegers. What you want is him as a person. S.H.I.E.L.D. was founded by his father. If you bring this up with him now, you can forget about getting him to join in this lifetime. Also, if you want him to join, you should talk to him directly. Don't come to me. It's no use coming to me. I'm just a psychologist, not his father. We didn't ask you to persuade Stark, and we know he won't listen to reason. What do you think of our idea? A team composed of people with special abilities. It's good in itself, but it depends on who they work for. Isn't it for S.H.I.E.L.D.? So, for whom does S.H.I.E.L.D. work? Nick frowned, then decisively changed the subject, saying, Okay, we'd like to invite you to join us. You said it yourself, it's a team made up of people with special abilities. I'm just an ordinary person, and I've never jumped more than 3 meters in the long jump. Nick opened his mouth, thinking Schiller was treating him like a fool. Listen, we don't care how you disappeared and then suddenly reappeared hundreds of meters away. Nor do we care where that blonde rat with a Canadian accent came from, and we can ignore your terrifyingly accurate psychological analysis. But a neurologist told us personally that you threatened him with a floating ballpoint pen, Schiller said to the symbiote in his mind. From now on, you can't eat other people's brains at will except for Strange's. Schiller asked, Do you believe in magic? If certain scientific forces created these individuals with special abilities, then I also believe that other forces could create other people. Are you one of them? No, I'm just an ordinary person. But I think I can use a piece of information to exchange for my freedom. About what? Magic. That's right. I believe you should have the authority to access satellites to investigate where that missing network in New York went. Nick frowned, but Schiller didn't say anything more to him. The New York Temple's wireless network likely relies on modern internet systems, not some magical network. They've simply used magic to conceal the access route. If Nick were to investigate, he would surely find some clues. The reason Schiller didn't refuse outright was that in the various major events that followed, the Avengers would still be needed to save the world. He wasn't going to suffer the hardship of dealing with those enemies himself like the Lizard Man or Red Hulk. At most, he'll offer a little help for his own safety, so he has to stay in touch with these superheroes so that he can be a refreshing troublemaker in future events. Holy crap! Thank you so much, Eon Fei, for the 50,000 Cheetian coins reward. Thanks! I saw all the other people's donations. Thank you, everyone. Chapter 48 Evil Begets Evil. The weather in New York is starting to get colder. The morning mist clings to the window panes, leaving a hazy white layer and casting a dim yellow glow on the newly lit streetlights. Schiller, holding a cup of coffee, sat at his desk in Stark Labs. Stark walked over with a large stack of data and said, We need to modify joint number 5 again, then do a control group experiment with joint number 13. Also, the data for the number 7 arm armor is problematic. I'll need to readjust it later. Schiller said, Can't you take a break? Aren't you tired? As Stark spread the data on the table and organized it, he said, You've asked me this question at least 20 times last night, starting at 7 p.m. last night and continuing until 7 a.m. this morning. That's because you've been dragging me to do experiments since 7 p.m. last night. I didn't even have time to have a cup of coffee. So what are you doing now? 3 minutes have passed. Have you finished drinking? We still have 2 more groups to conduct experiments, and we have to finish them before 8 o'clock today. Schiller collapsed onto the table. Peter emerged from behind the glass door of the lab, carrying 2 documents. He said, Mr. Stark, there seems to be a problem with the external support structure for leg bone number 5. In the 3rd set of data Jarvis just gave me, the bone support structure appears to be unstable, and the support structure is at risk of breaking. Although Jarvis suggested we change the material, using a keel that is too stiff would reduce its flexibility and agility. Stark took the documents from Peter, glanced at them and said, This isn't a big problem. He held out his hand and pointed to the design drawing for Peter. We'll add a cushioning system to this joint later, and then move this down 2 centimeters. Peter stroked his chin thoughtfully. Stark stepped forward and pulled Schiller up, saying, normally it only takes you 3 seconds to drink a cup of strong coffee, but now you've been drinking it for almost 5 minutes. Get up and get to work. My magical abilities need to be restored. I remember someone saying that was a low-level operation. Schiller covered his eyes and said, can't you get a complete mech? I can cast a spell on it and then you can use it directly. Why do you have to take it apart piece by piece to experiment with? Stark said, rather speechlessly, why is it that sometimes I feel like you know a lot about these things, but other times I feel like you're a complete mechanical idiot? He spread the design on the table and pointed to the pattern, saying, see? After you used magic to help me solve the problem of shrinking and unfolding the Mark IV, I can focus on its performance and functionality. But once I improve the performance and functionality of a certain part, I have to retest whether it can shrink and unfold, or whether the functions after unfolding are the same as I expected. So I have to do a lot of modular experiments to test whether a feature will achieve the effect I expect when it is scaled down and expanded individually. So is there any component that didn't achieve your desired effect? Schiller asked. What if he's next? Stark said. Schiller collapsed onto the table again, slumped over by those damned, meticulous science students. Peter said, I agree with Mr. Stark. Building this kind of mech is no joke. If you fly tens of thousands of meters in the air and a component malfunctions, it would be too dangerous. That's not all, Stark said while organizing the design drawings. Low-power operation and high-power or even overclocking operation have different effects. You have to make sure that it performs as perfectly as possible at every energy efficiency output level. Then Stark grabbed Schiller's arm and pulled him back to the lab bench. Peter handed him a component, which Schiller disassembled and reassembled, and then Stark took it to test. Peter then handed him another component, which Schiller disassembled and reassembled again, and then took it to test. Peter and Stark were doing experiments, but Schiller felt like he was just someone screwing in light bulbs on an assembly line. The symbiote kept repeating in his mind, their heads smell so good. Really so good. I want to eat them. Can I eat one of them? Just one, and then I'll eat the other one next time. I want to eat the blue-eyed one first. Schiller discovered that symbiotes seem to be able to detect human brainwaves. When a person's brain starts to work rapidly, he can detect a pheromone released in their brain. The faster the brain is active, the more fragrant the person smells. Unfortunately, for super geniuses like Peter and Stark, their brains are like a walking, super delicious, fragrant fried chicken to the symbiote they simply cannot resist. Somehow, the symbiote also learned to repeatedly play the sound of swallowing saliva in Schiller's mind, making him hungry just listening to it. After Schiller finished turning on the last light bulb that was handed to him, he said, let's go get something to eat. Aren't you hungry? Stark tossed him 2 compressed biscuits and said, thanks to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s new gadgets, I can now work for 40 hours straight. Schiller took a deep breath and said, aren't you sleepy? And you, Peter, you haven't slept for almost 2 days either. Have you? The reason I brought this kid over is that he has much more energy than the others. Peter shrugged and said, since I gained my powers, I only need a short nap to stay energized. I just took a 15-minute nap in the lounge and I feel pretty good now. To put it another way, why would a mage like you feel sleepy? Don't you have any magic to refresh yourself? Schiller didn't actually feel physically tired. With the symbiote, he could go without eating, drinking, or sleeping. But anyone who had been fiddling with a light bulb for over 20 hours would feel mentally exhausted. Schiller didn't understand their armor design at all. But whenever Stark came out from behind the glass door excitedly to show off his new ideas, Schiller would act as a cheerleader and applaud him. If he didn't do that, Stark would rush back into the glass door, and after a series of clanging and banging explosions, he would come out with his new ideas. Stark said, how can you be so indifferent to such a great undertaking? This is a milestone in the history of human science. Perhaps even magical. For the first time, we have combined the product of human technology with a new and magical power. Aren't you looking forward to the results they will produce? I'm more concerned about something else, Schiller said. Are you planning to call this series of armors Mark as well? I think it should have a new name. A new name? What do you think of the S series? Your first name and the first letter of my last name. Peter will be sad. He was also involved in the manufacturing. Stark scratched his head, and Peter said, I don't really care about that. But more than the name, I think the new armor should have a cooler look, something completely different from the Mark series. I think you could design it in blue, Schiller said. It goes well with magic and also distinguishes it from your Mark series. Let's hurry up. Once we've tested all the parts, we can start assembling it, and then we can paint it a nice color. I think blue and silver would be a good combination. Also, Stark said, looking at Schiller, I think this mech should have some magical attack capabilities. But I'm sorry, the magic I've learned doesn't have any offensive capabilities, Schiller said. What about the weightlessness technique? I think being able to float objects would be pretty good. You could consider magnetism, Schiller said, betraying Magneto without any hesitation. Perhaps magnetism is stronger than you think. When Natasha arrived, the three of them hadn't slept for almost 50 hours. Schiller and Peter, because of their superpowers, looked relatively normal, but Stark had a huge panda eye. Natasha said, We were almost ready to put up missing person ads for you. You've been missing for almost 3 whole days. But we have a very good result, Stark said. Immediately afterwards, Natasha saw Stark take out a cigarette. The female agent smiled and said, Looks like you're still as clueless as ever. I haven't smoked since I joined S.H.I.E.L.D. Isn't it a bit late for you to start thinking about health now? Schiller asked her. Health preservation? I'm not doing this for health preservation. Have you ever seen a Russian who practices health preservation? That damn smoke alarm in the S.H.I.E.L.D. office goes off more than 20 times a day. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I quit smoking. Hey, look here. What are you talking about? Look at me. Look at my work, Stark said. He tossed the cigarette into the air, and in an instant, a suit of silver and dark blue armor appeared on his body. This mech does differ slightly from the Mark series in design. It appears thinner, more streamlined, and better fits Stark's physique. Moreover, it doesn't make any mechanical noises like other mechs during its arming and movement. Rather than a mech, it's more like a uniquely designed bodysuit. Schiller stood up and said, You used to be 10 centimeters taller than me when you were wearing the mech, but now you're only 3 centimeters taller. Is that the important point? Of course, because you're not wearing a mecha suit and you're a centimeter shorter than me. It's 2 centimeters shorter, sir, Peter said. You also need to take off the shoes. Stark took a deep breath, and with a light leap, his armor floated in the air without making as much noise as before. Stark said, Thank you for the inspiration. I also think jet propulsion is a bit of a letdown, but this magnetic levitation system is still somewhat immature, and I need to improve it further. Schiller quickly asked Natasha, Did Nick Fury need something from me? I can go over and get him another invoice. Any size will do. Natasha said, Well, there is something going on. It seems to be related to the group of ninjas that the captain and Peter dealt with before. So, you're here to see Peter, and what about Schiller? Stark said. No, I received a lot of money from S.H.I.E.L.D., and I felt it was necessary to give them all a basic psychological and emotional test. This is very important for some field agents, to prevent them from going crazy due to anxiety. No charge this time? Certainly. Chapter 49 Ironclad Ambition, Part 1. At this moment, Coulson stood at the door of Nick Fury's office, looking very puzzled. He watched as everyone who walked to the intersection turned right. Natasha came out of Nick's office, and Coulson stopped her and asked, What's going on? Why are they taking such a long detour? I remember the closest route to the elevator is to the left. Because our genius psychologist, who charges exorbitant consultation fees, is in that office on the left, waiting for someone to come for psychological counseling. You actually managed to get him here? How much did he ask for? Couldn't be $100 million an hour, could it? No. Nick's report says $50 million per hour. Coulson gasped. So, if I go to him for psychological counseling right now, it's like getting $50 million for free? You can understand it that way too. There must be a long line there. Will I be able to get in line today? On the contrary, there's not a single person there, Natasha said with a shrug. After saying that, she turned right and left. Coulson shouted, You're going the wrong way. That's the emergency exit. The elevator is on the left. Without turning her head, Natasha said, I want to exercise, for health reasons. Coulson was even more confused. Then Nick came out of his office, and Coulson greeted him. Good morning, Director. Nick nodded to him and said, Natasha has recently stepped away from the Stark Industries business, but she'll be following up on the hand case. You just need to keep an eye on that wandering kid and make sure he doesn't cause any trouble. Coulson responded with a yes, and then he noticed that Nick was also turning to turn right. He grabbed his superior and said, Chief, the elevator is over there. If you take the right side, it will take at least 5 more minutes. I've been working out lately and plan to take the stairs. Carlson was utterly bewildered. Muttering to himself, he walked to the left and saw that Schiller's office door was ajar. He knocked and went inside. Schiller, engrossed in writing, looked up in surprise and said, "Someone actually came." Carlson paused for a moment and said, "Is it closed now? I remember we said in the meeting this morning that psychological counseling would start this morning. Of course, open the door. Please come in, you're the first one." Schiller stood up with his pen in hand and even pulled out a chair for Carlson. This enthusiasm made Carlson a little flustered. Schiller said, "Of course, you might also be the only one. I don't understand. If a psychological counseling session costs $50 million an hour and can be done for free with the Bureau reimbursing it, why don't they come? It's probably because I asked for $50 million and Nick agreed. What's wrong with that? Doesn't it just show that the director is very confident in your abilities?" Putting aside his macroeconomic understanding of funding and his flexible use of reimbursement within the system, have you ever considered that perhaps it is precisely his affirmation of me that has kept everyone else out here? You mean they think you're too good? Schiller said, utterly speechless. Are you really an 8th level agent? What level is Natasha then? Is the maximum level 100? Which secret agent would be willing to hire a top-notch psychologist to uncover all their inner secrets? I thought it was just some simple emotional regulation, like releasing some anxiety or something. Then you can just go to the door and have a smoke. That won't do, the damn smoke alarms here are too sensitive, Carlson said. Okay, so you're here to relieve some kind of depression? Actually, no. It's because I see that the captain and you seem to have a good relationship, and I want him to sign my whole set of fan art cards. Could you ask him for me? Schiller spread his hands and said, Okay, I knew it, but that's what I earn money for. If this really helps relieve your anxiety, give me the card. I promise I'll make sure he signs every single one. That will be worth my $50 million an hour consultation fee. After Carlson left, Schiller was leisurely drinking coffee in his temporary office. But before he could finish slacking off all morning, he opened the door to get some fresh air when a sharp alarm suddenly went off. A small device on his head emitted a red light and began frantically sounding the alarm. Schiller was startled, but his spider senses didn't register anything. For safety, he was ready to teleport away at any moment. But then a sharp screech came from the fire sprinkler, which suddenly turned on and sprayed out a large amount of water mist. If Schiller hadn't dodged quickly, he would have been soaked to the bone. Carlson and a few agents ran over, looked up at the smoke alarm, then glanced at Schiller, who was staring at them with a coffee cup in his hand. Smoking is not allowed here. I don't smoke. Carlson gave him a suspicious look and said, Natasha had the exact same expression as you when she was caught. Did you throw the cigarette down the sink drain? Of course not, I don't smoke indoors. Carlson didn't smell any smoke either. He looked up at the constantly beeping smoke alarm and said, Well, looks like this damn thing is broken again. How on earth did you manage to make a smoke alarm that was over 100 decibels loud? If your house had 32 fires in a month, you'd understand. The symbiote said in Schiller's mind, I'm a little dizzy and nauseous. Let's go. Schiller said, It seems that today's therapy session is over. Even if it's less than an hour, it'll still be charged as an hour. Don't forget to have Nick pay the bill. I'm leaving now. Schiller left decisively because he knew it wasn't an accident. Someone didn't want him to stay there anymore. After all, it was a waste of time to take a 5-minute detour every time he went downstairs. Humans are always like this. Before they can read minds, they always fantasize that someone can understand them and know what they are thinking. But when someone actually has the ability to read minds, everyone avoids them like the plague. Of course, within S.H.I.E.L.D., this is more likely due to Nick Fury's unconventional talent management system. Back at the clinic, Schiller, who hadn't slept for dozens of hours, planned to take a short nap. The symbiote played some very soothing music for him, which helped him fall asleep quickly. However, before he could enter a deep sleep, he was woken up by a phone call. What? Then what's the point of you looking for me? Go find Pepper. She's busy? Does that mean I'm not busy? Okay, I'm not busy, but don't even think about letting me into the lab again. I really don't want to twist light bulbs anymore. Yes, I know that's a revolutionary great armor, not a light bulb. Can you get down to business now? Jarvis discovered something amiss in the parts storage. The number of parts is off. Are you sure you didn't miscount? Okay, I know you're meticulous, but how can I help with this? I can't conjure up the missing parts out of thin air for you. No, Not even with magic. It's hard for me to say. Schiller paced back and forth in the clinic's living room. Perhaps you should ask Jarvis for his speculation. He's more than just a computer now. Jarvis is being a bit hesitant. Don't you already know the answer? Or have you actually thought of someone to suspect, but you're just unwilling to admit it? No, of course I can't use my mind-reading ability on something like this. Don't joke around. I can tell you, there's an 80% chance that the person you're thinking about. After hanging up the phone, Schiller grabbed Pikachu, rubbed his cheek, and said, "It's really hard to say whether a solid steel fortress is first breached from the inside." "What trouble is that stiff-looking guy in?" Pikachu asked. It seems like something's missing from his armor, and his AI assistant gave him an answer from a suspect he didn't want to hear. He's now questioning his existence. You humans always like to create unnecessary trouble for yourselves, Pikachu concluded. That kid named Puck, he was worried about killing the hostages while playing a game. It's just a game. Even if the hostages die, if the kidnappers are wiped out, we still win, right? So you just rushed over and killed the hostages first? Otherwise, what can I do if that kid keeps dawdling? You guys worry about too many meaningless things, always getting too involved, full of unnecessary worries about things that haven't happened yet, but always running away from things that have already happened. I never expected that you, a mouse, could say something so insightful. Of course, I am Detective Pikachu. Inside Stark Tower, all the lights in Stark Labs were off, leaving only a few instrument lights flickering faintly, like twinkling stars. Stark leaned against the lab table, sitting on the floor, a symbol flashing on his phone next to him, indicating that Jarvis was also there. "I'm trying to comfort you, sir. So you turned off all the lights?" Stark's voice was a little hoarse. The excessive late nights had left him exhausted. "This might help you relax a bit. Dim lighting helps relax the brain," Jarvis said. Stark closed his eyes, shifted to a more relaxed position, leaned against the lab table, curled up one leg, draped his arm over it, and looked up, saying as if in his sleep, "Maybe this is retribution. Stark Industries' weapons have displaced countless people. So those I once trusted will inevitably leave me one by one. We cannot be certain yet that Mr. Obadiah is the murderer," Jarvis said. "In our analysis, he is only about 96% likely." "You could put it more bluntly," Stark said. "Sorry, I meant there's still a 4% chance it's not him. Who could be the remaining one? Mr. Schiller accounts for 2%, Mr. Parker accounts for 1.2%, and you yourself account for 0.8%. Schiller? You expect someone who can't even distinguish between the mech parts numbered 1 to 10 to steal the most important core? And Peter, that kid may be a bit dim-witted, but he wouldn't steal anything. He's the kind of kid who would be shocked for ages if he saw me smoking." "I'm trying to comfort you," Jarvis said. Finally, Stark felt all the sounds of the world gradually fade away, and in his half-awake state, he remembered Howard's face. At that time, Uncle Obadiah and his father were standing together. They were both very young. "Happy belated Lantern Festival! I had guests over yesterday, so I couldn't update again. I wrote this chapter in a spare moment during my busy schedule, so please vote. The recommendation process is still in the elimination rounds. Whether we advance depends on everyone's votes. Please." Chapter 50 Ironclad Ambition, Part 2. "Tony won't see me right now, and I know he must be very disappointed. But I hope you can tell him that the Air Force isn't satisfied with the technology they've given them. They want more. My superior, General Johnson, has revealed that they want to join forces with the Army to put pressure on Stark Industries. Or perhaps they have more ulterior motives." Rod said on the phone that Schiller asked him, "Have you been excluded from the power center of this circle?" "Why?" "Because you wavered." Rhodes was silent for a moment before saying, "No, General Johnson has never really trusted me because I used to be General Andre's subordinate, and the two of them had a very bad relationship. That's why he forced you to go, right?" Schiller sighed and said, "What if you can't handle the pressure there?" Before Rhodes could speak, Schiller added, "Tony isn't seeing you right now because of anything related to the Air Force. There are some internal problems at Stark Industries, and he needs some time to recover. He hasn't left the house for several days." Rhodes' tone remained flat, just like his personality, always serious and seemingly rigid. He said, "I think we all know that Stark Industries is not a monolithic entity. There must be someone among them who is colluding with the military, and that person must be at a high level." He continued, "The military's acquisition of Stark Industries' technical information too quickly and in too much detail is abnormal. Although I don't know more information at the moment, I don't want Tony to be betrayed. You want me to tell him this? But perhaps you haven't considered that he already knows, and the reason he's been delaying it until now. I know he's too soft-hearted, otherwise he wouldn't have compromised with the military for me, but this matter is too serious. If he continues to be so indecisive, something terrible will definitely happen. Just then, Schiller heard a noise. He turned his head and saw 2 shooting stars streak across the sky, followed by 2 dazzling streaks of light that flashed across the sky. A violent explosion rang out at the edge of the sky, and the 2 streaks of light intertwined and fell downwards. Schiller looked out the window and said to the person on the other end of the phone, "Something terrible has happened." Schiller hung up the phone and transformed into a cloud of gray mist, traversing the streets of Manhattan and following the trail of the 2 streaks of light until he arrived at an abandoned warehouse in New York's XC district. This landing spot must have been chosen by Stark, because it's a rare abandoned urban area, and only by falling here can he avoid harming ordinary people. Schiller slowly materialized, but before he could go inside, the phone rang again. Rhodes said urgently on the other end, "Send me a satellite location. I'm coming right now. Tony might need my help." Schiller, while holding the phone, teleported to the roof of the warehouse and looked down. There, Iron Man, clad in gold and red armor, was locked in combat with a giant robot. That robot wasn't the Ironmonger. It is entirely black with gold accents on some joints. It is larger than the Ironmonger, but even more ferocious. Schiller said into the phone, "Things have changed. You'd better come over quickly." The battle below was intense. Iron Man wasn't unable to defeat the giant robot, but during the fall, he had to drag the robot down to an uninhabited area. As a result, he didn't have time to adjust his angle upon landing, and one side of his suit was already somewhat inflexible. This wasn't like when he was rescuing people and fighting off street thugs. Even with Jarvis's intelligent calculation system, Iron Man was still struggling to cope. It was clear that the robot seemed to have been prepared specifically to deal with him. Iron Man flew into the air, then swooped down and grabbed the robot around the waist, slamming it into the wall with a loud crash. A large section of the roof collapsed, landing on the 2 of them. Iron Man's situation was even worse. His entire shoulder armor was damaged, and he could barely lift one arm. However, the behemoth wasn't much better off. After being hit hard, it was also electrocuted, and a large chunk of the cockpit was knocked off. However, there was no pilot inside. It seemed someone was remotely controlling it. Upon discovering this, Iron Man devised a way to deal with it. He first pretended that the mech had gone out of control, climbed out from the falling steel frame on the roof, and then pretended to be defeated and fell to the ground. The large robot also struggled to climb out of the steel frame and found that Iron Man had fallen to the ground. Picked up a steel bar and tried to stab it into Iron Man's chest. Just as he leaned his entire upper body forward to exert force, the Iron Man on the ground suddenly sprang up, kicking it in the knee, followed by an elbow strike to the robot's head. The robot's upper body was designed to be too bulky. Although it was very strong, it was inevitably unstable and took a solid elbow strike from Iron Man, swaying and falling to one side. Just as Iron Man was about to use the same trick again, combining electric shocks with impacts to defeat it, the giant robot suddenly started smoking, and Jarvis began frantically calling the alarm. Iron Man quickly retreated, but he was still a step too late. A massive explosion sent a huge mushroom cloud into the warehouse, the roar of which could be heard several blocks away. It had self-destructed. Clearly, there was a reason why the designers of this giant robot made its upper body so large. There's a huge bomb inside with a very high yield. When Schiller pulled Stark out of the Jaeger, his face was covered in blood. He had at least 3 broken ribs, and it appeared that his ankle and arm were also fractured. Stark himself does not have any superpowers. Although his brain is very developed, his limbs are obviously much worse. Stark struggled to raise his arm and wipe the blood from his eyes. Seeing it was Schiller, he breathed a sigh of relief and said, "I have my phone in my pocket. Jarvis will call another Jaeger to check if anyone's around." The explosion was too big. Clearly, his head had also suffered some impact. Schiller opened his eyelids and saw that his eyes were severely bloodshot. He took out a small bottle of medicine, poured out a pill, and made Stark take it. The high-concentration painkiller worked very well. "Soon," Stark said, "this thing is coming for me. It has a strong ability to counter my Jaeger and can even predict my movements. I can't believe it." "Can't believe what?" "Can't believe that the person who knows you best could betray you?" If you have that kind of skill, build a few more mechs and you can win with one punch each. I know I shouldn't hide in the lab to escape, but I just want to process this fact. You can't expect me to be emotionless like a zombie. Stark looks very negative now. His face is filled with dejection and disappointment. Stark coughed heavily a few times, a trickle of blood running down the corner of his mouth. Clearly, the impact had also upset his respiratory tract. A euphoric feeling from the high-concentration painkiller surged through him. He seemed mesmerized, and whispered, "I knew his friends wouldn't be good people. Just as rotten as him, I thought. No, or perhaps he's right. Stark is not someone you can entrust your life to. He'll only ever disappoint you." Schiller laid Stark's head flat, checked his pulse, and found his heart rate was a little low. He wanted to take Stark away directly, but Stark was like a drunkard and refused to leave. It's clear that he doesn't have a strong will to survive right now. So Schiller could only sit cross-legged beside him, next to the wreckage of Iron Man's suit, and the crater from the explosion of the giant robot was just a short distance away, with smoke rising from it. The entire warehouse had been blown to pieces, with steel bars and cement fragments scattered all over the ground, making everything look like a post-apocalyptic ruin. Schiller asked Stark, "Obadiah is actually more like your father than Howard, isn't he?" Stark didn't answer him, as if he were asleep. After a while, he slowly said, "When I made my first robot, Uncle Obadiah was very happy. He said I was a genius just like my father. I always heard my father's name mentioned by him. He described him as a flawless person, intelligent, upright, steadfast, and righteous. In my memory, whenever he mentioned Howard's name, it was always with admiration and nostalgia. But later, I started to dislike hearing that name more and more, so he stopped mentioning it." Stark's voice was hoarse. He was almost breathless as he spoke. He said, "I saw a photo of them together. It was on his desk. In it, they were both young and full of vigor." "Perhaps it's like you and Rod," Schiller said. "No, that's different. Completely different. I'm nothing like Howard. Nothing at all. Rhodes isn't like Obadiah either. Rhodes and I are complete opposites, and we will never be their copy. Never." After that, Stark fell silent, the painkillers quickly putting him into a deep sleep. When Rhodes arrived and saw Stark's severe injuries, he slammed his fist on the wreckage of the mech. Schiller said to him, "Right now, I think his mental state is a bigger problem than his physical injuries. Aren't you a psychologist? Can't you offer him some guidance?" "I'm a psychologist, not God." Clearly, he's reached a dead end. He feels that everything he's suffering now is retribution. His retribution, his father's retribution, and Stark Industries' retribution. He wants to hand all of this over to someone else? You'll have to ask him. He once said he would never back down for his family, but now it seems he really wants to give it all up. Rhodes glanced back at Stark lying on the ground and said, "If there's any price he has to pay, it's perhaps for his brilliant mind and his sensitive heart." "He said you two are complete opposites," Schiller said. "He has a suit of armor, and what about you? Do you have a heart that is steadfast enough?" Rhodes turned around, looked at the wrecked mech in front of him, and said nothing.